more questions on passage 1.8 before we go on?
1.8 was the jhana passage.
What?
1.8 was the jhana passage.
Right.
So a couple questions that come up around Buddha nature and pure awareness. Maybe we can ask those later, but I was curious, in the second jhana, the description of no water coming into the lake from any side and coming up from its own source internally. And I wonder if you look at Buddha nature from the perspective not of as an innate good, but as what you say about pure happiness doesn't take anything from anybody, it comes from inside. And that the entire potentiality of the path, that everything that we use and the fruits exist inside. Can you see?
You're reading a lot into that passage.
Yeah.
He's talking about a state of concentration.
But is there anything that we actually do need to go outside for with this practice, or I mean, can it come?
Well, you're going to be still learning things about your mind as you interact with the world. But what you're trying to develop here is a sense of well-being that does come from within. And it's, at this point, it's something that's constructed, it's something that's fabricated. Now, there is a potential in there. As I said earlier, that it's like the fresh water and salt water. It's there, and it has to be found through effort, or distilled out through effort. And at that point, the mind is totally independent. But even with the jhana, I mean, you're still dependent to some extent on the body. The body needs a certain amount of strength in order to do the jhana. So you're dependent, and of course the body is going to be dependent on the world outside to some extent.
In the concept of access concentration, which the Visuddhimagga talks about, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's not in the canon.
Yeah.
And, one of the best or explanations for these different levels of settling in that I've heard is that with momentary concentration, which is our everyday kind of concentration, the concentration we read books and listen to conversations, that can stand. It can't withstand pain. It meets with anything that it doesn't like, and it goes. Your focus changes to something else. Access concentration can deal with pain and actually turn it into pleasure. But then when it hits the pleasure, it loses focus. In other words, it can't deal with pleasure. And fixed penetration, which is the full concentration, can deal with both pleasure and pain and not lose its focus. That's the best analogy I can give. John Lee tries to apply that. Access concentration is basically any concentration up to the point of jhana in one context. In another context, he says it's first, second, and third jhanas would count as access concentration, and the fourth jhana would count as fixed penetration. So even John Lee is not consistent on that. Yes.
John, even if a person has been able to experience the pleasure and rapture of the jhanas, is it possible that he will fall and falter? And
Oh yes, I mean jhana on its own doesn't protect you from faltering. It's a combination of the discernment and the concentration, and all factors of the path have to be present.
So that means that the samadhi itself is not doing much, so something else has to come in. So where does that come from?
It comes from the realization that this isn't enough. That you can't just depend on chilling out every day. That there's more needs to be done. And sometimes when your concentration gets really good, you tend to forget that. So I can just go in anytime I want. I'm safe. That attitude, that gets complacent. Okay, passage 1.9 actually talks about how to use jhana as a basis for gaining discernment. And I'll focus here on the passage on the first jhana. Okay, suppose an archer or archer's apprentice were to practice on a straw man or mound of clay. So after a while he would be able to shoot long distances, to fire accurate shots in rapid succession, and to pierce great masses. The same way, there's a case where you enter and remain in the first jhana, rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, accompanied by directed thought and evaluation. Okay, you basically get into that state of concentration, and then you regard whatever phenomena there that are connected with form, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness as inconstant, stressful, a disease, a cancer, an error, a painful infliction, alien, a disintegration, and emptiness, not self. You turn your mind away from those phenomena, and having done so, you incline your mind to the property of deathlessness. This is peace, this is exquisite, the resolution of all fabrications, the relinquishment of all acquisitions, the ending of craving, dispassion, cessation, unbinding. Staying right there, you reach the ending of the effluence, or if not, then through this very Dhamma passion, this Dhamma delight, through the total wasting away of the 5 lower fetters. You are due to be reborn in the pure abodes there, to be totally unbound, never again to return from that world. Okay, there's several steps going here. First, you get into the state of jhana, and then you learn how to analyze it in terms of the 5 aggregates. Now, the 5 aggregates, the name is kind of misleading. It sounds like piles of gravel. Or it sounds like things. It's actually activities, what they're talking about in the mind. The mind has an activity whereby in which it perceives form, whereby you feel, you perceive, you fabricate things, and you are conscious of things. These are all verbs. But there's one passage where the Buddha defines all the aggregates in terms of verbs. And so you realize, okay, this concentration itself is made up of those 5 aggregates. You've got the form of the body, the breath, which is the form, the feeling of pleasure that comes from developing concentration, that's your feeling, the perception of the breath that held you there with the breath, the image of the mental label that you had, that's perception. The directed thought and evaluation, those are fabrications. And then the awareness of all this is consciousness. So what you've done is you've taken the 5 aggregates and you've made them in a state of concentration. And as you try to perfect that, you begin to realize, okay, even that state of concentration, which is about as stable as the aggregates get, that still has its drawbacks. And this is where you apply the perceptions of inconstant, stressful, disease, cancer, etc. Until you develop a sense of dispassion for that, then you turn your mind away from all those aggregates. And having done so, you incline your mind to the property of the deathlessness. Because what would be the true happiness would be something that's totally unfabricated. Because up to that point, the jhana has been good enough. Even though it's fabricated, you say, I don't care, it's good. But there comes a point where you say, look, there's got to be something better. Your mind has gotten so sensitive that you begin to perceive that there's something lacking or something still unstable there in the jhana, and you want something better. So you incline your mind to no fabricating at all, which means at that moment you have to drop all intentions. Now at that point, in the dropping of the intentions and inclining the mind towards the deathless, either you do gain full awakening, or if not, if there's any passion or delight in the experience of the deathless, then you become a non-return. Which is not bad. But what happened is that you still regard the deathless as an object of the mind. And that way makes it an object of clinging. That's what the delight and passion are about. That's still a subtle form of clinging. Which is why when they talk about the 3 characteristics, they say, all fabrications are inconstant, all fabrications are stressful, all phenomena, all dhammas are not self. Even the deathless, at that point you have to say, this is not me. If you can't make that, if you can't drop that attachment, then you can't get all the way.
And in getting to that point, you've uprooted the fetters, or a number of fetters.
Enough, quite a few actually, at least 5.
And what are the last 2 or 3?
The fetters?
Yeah.
We're going to go to that in
Okay,
that's the next passage.
I'm sorry.
So,
I have a question that positive practice, there's a sutta where the Buddha talks about living on the 8 precepts is living as arahants live. So just
in terms of their precepts.
Yeah, in terms of precepts. Okay, so you're practicing, knowing we don't understand as not arahants exactly what this means, but it's worth, just practicing. So I'm just wondering how might that relate to, so of course, to be able to completely penetrate not self from the point of jhana is that.
Okay,
Talking about how might we pretend.
You don't pretend, you don't
No, I don't mean, practice, because we can't actually know.
Yeah.
As not.
Well, what you do is you look, is there anything unskillful in my mind? You learn how to drop whatever it is. Now, most of us say there are these areas of unskillfulness I'm going to hold on to for a while, because I really and I'll let go of some of those other ones. I mean, if you see something's unskillful, you say, look, I gotta drop it.
Yeah, it's not quite, I'm not asking a very good question, I don't think.
No, I'm giving you a good answer for it. No, but I mean, I'm serious. But this is how you practice letting go. I mean, you're developing the habit of, I recognize that there's something unskillful here, I can't hold on to it.
So, and that being identified with a particular stage of jhana as it was being related in
Even
here.
before you get to the jhana, just if you go through your life and you realize, I'm doing this unskillful thing.
So that becomes such a strong habit that it even comes in as you're in these deep states of jhana?
Yeah, because there's a passage, and it's interesting that different ajahns will say it in slightly different ways, but the message is, once you get to the end of the path, you realize it was the same path all the way through.
Yeah,
Which is, if you
that.
see you're doing something unskillful, let it go.
All right, so I really just don't need to worry about this right now.
No. I mean, and it's not putting you down, it's just that wherever you're attached.
Yeah.
Now, there are some attachments to good things. You'll go, this is something skillful, I gotta hold on, I can't let it go yet. But if something is really unskillful, and you find yourself going back to it. I've told you the story about the prince that was a dog.
The priest that was a
The
dog.
prince that was a
Oh,
dog.
The prince that was a dog. I believe you have. I'm not remembering it right now, so.
You want to hear it again?
Yeah, please. Do this to me again.
There was this Deva who had a friend from a previous lifetime and was looking around for the friend to see where he was, and realized he'd been born as a dog. And so I said, this is kind of sad. So the Deva had some power, so he said, let's make you a prince. So makes him a prince. And then this prince is kind of wandering around and runs into a princess, and she just immediately falls in love with him, takes him home, and tells her parents, okay, this is the man I want. And they says, wait, what kind of prince is this? Where is his parents? What kingdom? Whatever. And she said, I don't care. And she's insistent enough so that she finally talks him into allowing her to marry him. And the problem is that he's, even though he's a prince, but he still has some of his dog habits.
Oh my gosh.
And so one day she goes into the bathroom and she finds him at the toilet eating the shit out of the toilet. And she realizes this is not a real prince, and so she drives him out of the house.
Okay.
Now do you remember the story?
I've had this lesson before.
And there was the follow-up lesson. Remember the other follow-up lesson?
I'm sure I do. Let me think.
Yes.
Go ahead.
It's another one about a prince, a Deva. Not a princess, it was a Deva, who checks around to see a friend from a previous lifetime and finds it's a worm down in an outhouse. And so he goes down and says, what are you doing down here? And the worm says, what do you mean down here? I'm in heaven. More food than I could possibly eat, and it keeps falling out of the sky.
All right, I'm done asking questions.
Any other questions on using jhana as a basis for discernment? Yes.
Seems like this passage is also talking about basically entering the jhana and then after that deconstructing the jhana sort of. But it seems to me that if we look at the story of the Buddha, he himself had attained to the infinite consciousness and the nivasanyaya, nasanyaya, atana, and all that, and he was not happy with that. So he did not deconstruct it at that point.
He didn't deconstruct, he just stopped that practice.
I see.
Getting to those states of really high formless concentration, which he did before his awakening. There are different ways of getting there. You don't have to go through the 4 jhanas to get to the formal states. The canon itself outlines a couple of alternative paths. So it's possible he could have just bypassed the jhanas entirely. Secondly, he was treating that as an end under that teacher. The teacher said, this is it, this is as far as you go. Well, he got there, and he said, this isn't satisfactory. And so instead of thinking, well, maybe I could use this as a means to something else, he just dropped the whole thing.
I see. But what this passage seems to say is that holding on to the dispassion that comes after attaining that.
No, this is a particular kind of dispassion that's been taking this up. You'd have to take it apart as aggregates, which he didn't do at that point.
So how did the idea of taking it apart in terms of aggregates come to him?
He's a Buddha. He tried everything else.
Okay, so it's just
This is basically when you pursue right view, it says everything that's constructed has, is going to have some suffering. And so you use that view to, sort of look out there at the world. And there finally comes that insight when you say, wait a minute, this view itself is constructed. And you turn around on that. And it's that flip with the insight that makes all the difference. Now we've heard about that, and so many of us flip too quickly. We haven't actually used it thoroughly to get rid of our attachments to everything. This is why you have to hold on to the banana peel until, it's time to eat the banana.
This is also the analogy of the raft, yes?
Right,
Yeah.
You don't let go of the raft until you've got to the other side. Okay, fetters. There was a question about the 10 fetters, passage 2.1. Okay, 5 lower fetters are self-identity views, uncertainty, grasping at habits and practices, sensual passion, and ill will. Okay, self-identity views are when you identify yourself in any way with any of the 5 aggregates, either as the aggregate itself, as owning the aggregate, as being in the aggregate, or having the aggregate in you. For example, you might decide that, okay, either I am my body, or whoever I am, I own this body, or I am inside this body. It's kind of you looking through the eyes and listening through the ears, with the little homunculus that kind of runs around. Or the idea that, okay, I've got this large consciousness, this infinite consciousness, and this body is located within that infinite consciousness. That any of those would count as a self-identity view with regard to form. And you can do the same with feelings, perceptions, fabrications, and consciousness. Uncertainty is being uncertain about whether the Buddha really was awakened or not. Grasping at habits and practices. Sometimes this is translated as grasping at precepts and practices. The word sila can mean either precept or habit. And I know a number of people say, well, I'm going beyond this one. I don't have any particular practices, and I don't have any precepts. I'm fine. This is not what we're talking about. It's the belief that by doing certain things in a certain way, you are guaranteed true happiness. You take Jesus Christ, your personal Lord, Savior, okay, guaranteed. When I was in grade school, my mother was president of the PTA, and my first grade teacher was also the principal, and she would occasionally stop by at the house and have conversations with my mother about the school. And I remember one time after the conversation, my mother came to the dinner table, and she said, I just heard the stupidest thing. This principal of ours was Roman Catholic, and they'd somehow gotten into discussion. My mother was Protestant. In fact, she was very Protestant. The principal had said, well, being a Catholic doesn't make you better than other people, then what good is it? And even at age 6, I thought that sounded pretty stupid. But basically believing that you do things in a certain way, that you obey certain laws or certain rules, and then you've got your in. There's a lot of that going around. Sensual passion, that kind of a fetter we've talked about already. Ill will, that binds you to the person that you have ill will for. Those are the first 5 fetters. The first 3 are abandoned on stream entry. The first 5 as a total are abandoned on non-returning. For an arahant, you have to abandon 5 more. That's not the case that you abandon them and then you have the experience of awakening. You have the experience of awakening and you come out and realize that those fetters are gone. So in this case, for the arahantship would remove any passion for form, i.e. for passion for the practice of jhana. Passion for what is formless, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. Now conceit here doesn't mean overweening pride, it means just a sense of, I am this. This is what I am. They say, well, what happened to the self-identity views up there? They said that for a non-returner, there still is a sense of I am, even though it's not located, you don't focus it on any of the aggregates, but there's still this kind of lingering sense of I am. And not only am I this, but you also compare yourself with others. I'm better than, I'm equal to, or I am less, I'm worse than somebody else. There's in this I am, there's a sense of comparison. It's kind of built in. Restlessness, John Mahabharata defines this as the tendency when you're getting close to awakening that all you can think about is I'm going to do discernment practice. I don't want to waste my time on concentration practice. And so you push yourself too hard. And then ignorance would be ignorance in terms of the Four Noble Truths. In other words, you haven't completed all the duties with regard to the Four Noble Truths until you've reached full awakening. So that's the list. Are there any questions about the list?
Might be mistaken, but I think you might have skipped doubt. Did you mention doubt?
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty. Ah, thank you.
One of the most ubiquitous Sakkaya Ditthi that seems to come into modern Dhamma in America is the sort of I am pure awareness and the identification with pure awareness.
That would be identification with consciousness.
Right, and so, okay, so pure awareness and consciousness are one and the same in the context, because it seems to come up a lot in Ajahn Chah lineage teachers, pure awareness. And I was, okay, so they're one and the same.
I've told you my Conrad Lawrence story, haven't I?
Yeah, but it's worth sharing again.
And there's no excrement in this one.
There is a bird, however.
Yes, there's a bird. Talking about habits and practices. Conrad Lawrence was a biologist who lived in Austria. And he had a goose, and the goose gave birth to goslings, and one gosling survived, and then the mother goose died. And so this little gosling immediately fixated on Conrad Lawrence as his parent, followed him around all the summer and in the yard. And then as fall came, Conrad Lawrence realized he was going to have to bring the goose, by now a fairly sizable goose, into the house. And so the time came for the goose's normal meal, and Conrad Lawrence didn't feed it, just kind of walked into the house. So the goose followed him into the house. And immediately on being inside the house, freaked out. It had never been in an enclosed space before. And the house was constructed, there was a hallway that went to a large window. Halfway down the hall there was a stairway that went up to Conrad Lawrence's apartment. And so the goose immediately saw the window, went running straight for the window. Conrad Lawrence, in the meantime, went up the stairs, and the goose realized it couldn't get out the window, and so it finally turned around and followed him up the stairs. And then every time after that it went into the house, it would go to the window first, come back, go up the stairs. And then as time passed, the trip to the window got shorter and shorter, until finally he would go to that corner of the stairway, shake his foot at the window, head up the stairs. One night, Conrad Lawrence came home late from work. The goose was very hungry. As soon as he opened the door, went running to the house up the stairs. Got halfway up the stairs and stopped. Started shaking all over. And they went down, walked over the window, came back, went up the stairs. That's attachment to habits and practices. Okay, let's look at passage 2.3. The effluents are to be abandoned by seeing. Now, I'll just have to point out some of the main features of this particular passage. The Buddha basically defines right view here as appropriate attention, i.e. the things that you know what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. So when the Buddha is talking about the Four Noble Truths, he's not saying, isn't it interesting to know these four truths? He's saying you want to see everything in terms of these four truths. You turn these into the framework with which you look at the world around you. And in doing that, that means you have to give up a lot of questions that normally get people obsessed. Was I in the past? Was I not in the past? What was I in the past? How was I in the past? Having been what was I in the past? Shall I be in the future? Shall I not be in the future? What shall I be in the future? How shall I be in the future? Having been what shall I be in the future? Or else you're inwardly perplexed about the immediate present. Am I not? What am I? How am I? Where is this being come from? Where is it bound? These are all questions that we said you don't want to pay attention to. Now, one of the most interesting ones here is that question is, am I not? Because a lot of us think the Buddha, that was a question the Buddha had a very clear answer to, i.e. I am not. But as we know from several other places in the canon, that was a question he put aside. And because the problem is if you start asking these questions, then you have the view either I have a self or I have no self, or it's precisely by means of self that I perceive self. If you've ever taken a philosophy course, so you heard Leibniz, it's yourself that allows you, you know immediately through yourself that you have a self. Or it's precisely by means of self that I perceive not self, again Leibniz. Or it's precisely by means of not self that I perceive self. That would be Fichte and Kant. In a nutshell. Or this, you have this view of this very self of mind, the knower that is sensitive here and there to the ripening of good and bad actions. It's a self of mind that is constant, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change, and will endure as long as eternity. Okay, and you latch onto any of these views, and as the Buddha says, it's a writhing contortion of views, a writhing of views, a wilderness of views, a fetter of views. You're not free from suffering and stress. Instead, he recommends that you look at things in terms of the Four Noble Truths. You know, where is the stress, what's causing it, where is the cessation of the stress, and what's the path of practice leading there. So this is how you get rid of those first three fetters, is by looking at things in terms of these truths, and then following the duties with regard to them. And learning how to put aside those other questions. Any questions on that? Okay, let's zip on to 2.10. Once, monks, in this very same solitude, there was a lady of household named Voidanika. This good report about Lady Voidanika had circulated. Lady Voidanika is gentle, Lady Voidanika is even-tempered, Lady Voidanika is calm. Now, Lady Voidanika had a slave named Gali who was diligent, deft, and neat in her work. The thought occurred to Gali the slave, this good report about my Lady Voidanika has circulated. Lady Voidanika is even-tempered, Lady Voidanika is gentle, Lady Voidanika is calm. Now, is anger present in my lady without showing, or is it absent? Or is it just because I'm diligent, deft, and neat in my work that the anger present in my lady doesn't show? Why don't I test her? Now, it's not saying here that Gali was very smart. So Gali the slave got up late after daybreak. Then Lady Voidanika said to her, "Hey, Gali." "Yes, madam." "Why did you get up after daybreak?" "No reason, madam." "No reason, you wicked slave, and you get up after daybreak?" Angered and displeasured, she scowled. Then the thought occurred to Gali the slave, anger is present in my lady without showing, not absent. It's just because I'm diligent, deft, and neat in my work that the anger present in my lady doesn't show. Why don't I test her some more? I actually like Gali quite a lot.
Yeah.
So Gali the slave got up later in the day. Then Lady Voidanika said to her, "Hey, Gali." "Yes, madam." "Why did you get up later in the day?" "No reason, madam." "No reason, you wicked slave, and you get up later in the day?" Angered and displeased, she grumbled. Then the thought occurred to Gali the slave, anger is present, my lady, etc., etc. So she decides to test her some more. So the Gali the slave got up even later in the day. And Lady Voidanika said, "Hey, Gali." "Yes, madam." "Why did you get up even later in the day?" "No reason, madam." "No reason, you wicked slave, and you get up even later in the day?" Angered and displeased, she grabbed hold of a rolling pin and gave a whack over the head, cutting it open. Then Gali the slave, with blood streaming from her cut-open head, went and denounced her mistress to the neighbors. "See, ladies, the gentle one's handiwork. See the even-tempered one's handiwork. See the calm one's handiwork. How could she, angered and displeased with her only slave for getting up after daybreak, grab hold of the rolling pin and give her a whack over the head, cutting it open?" I've forgotten what the polyword for whack is, but no. After that, this evil report about Lady Voidanika circulated. Lady Voidanika is vicious, Lady Voidanika is foul-tempered, Lady Voidanika is violent. So the Buddha is giving a lesson to a monk here. He says that you may be ever so gentle, ever so even-tempered, ever so calm, as long as you are not touched by disagreeable aspects of speech. But it's only when disagreeable aspects of speech touch you that you can be truly known as gentle, even-tempered, and calm. Then he goes on, next paragraph, he talks about the 5 kinds of speech there are. Timely or untimely, true or false, affectionate or harsh, beneficial or unbeneficial, with a mind of goodwill, with inner hate. And what the Buddha is having you do here as you contemplate this is to realize that this is the nature of human speech. If someone speaks to you in ways that are untimely, false, harsh, unbeneficial, or with inner hate, this is nothing new. Okay? This has been happening all over the world for who knows how long, ever since human beings learned how to talk. And thinking in these ways helps to depersonalize it. So it's not that I'm not the only victim of this kind of speech. There are other people out there who have been victimized as much or more. Then he goes on to say, people will address you in any of these ways, and in any event, you should train yourselves. Our minds will remain unaffected. We will say no evil words. We will remain sympathetic to that person's welfare with a mind of goodwill and with no inner hate. We'll keep pervading him with an awareness imbued with goodwill, and beginning with him, we'll keep pervading the all-encompassing world with an awareness imbued with goodwill. Abundant, expansive, immeasurable, free from hostility, free from ill will. That's how you should train yourselves. And then he gives several similes. The first one is one of the best. Suppose that a man were to come along carrying a hoe in a basket, saying, I will make this great earth be without earth. He would dig here and there, scatter soil here and there, spit here and there, urinate here and there, saying, be without earth, be without earth. And what do you think? Would he be able to make this great earth be without earth? No, Lord. Why is that? Because this great earth is deep and enormous. It can't easily be made to be without earth. The man would reap only his share of weariness and disappointment. And so then the Buddha goes on to say, okay, you should make your goodwill deep like the earth. But no matter what they do, they can spit and urinate and whatever, but you're going to maintain your goodwill regardless. At the very end of the passage, the Buddha says, even if bandits were to carve you up savagely limb by limb with a two-handed saw, he among you who would let his heart get angered even at that would not be doing my bidding. Even then you should train yourselves. Our minds will be unaffected and we will say no evil words, and so forth. Now the Buddha here is using some extreme examples to drive home the point that, okay, when you're subject to ill-tempered speech or untimely, harsh, untrue speech, regard it as something normal and don't let your goodwill waver. So this is one of the ways in which you overcome ill will for others, realizing that you need to protect your goodwill, like the mother, as I said earlier, the mother protecting her child, you protect your goodwill in any circumstance. Any questions about that? Yes?
I get confused sometimes about when to change the conditions that are unwholesome and just when to deal to use my own practice and not worry about the conditions and how to protect my goodwill.
Okay, your first thing is to protect the goodwill and then ask, what can I do right now? Because our immediate problem is, someone says something like that and ill will comes out, and then you can't see clearly what's right. I think a good rule of thumb would be asking, what can I do right now to help change the situation? Because contentment doesn't mean just putting up with anything. But here you're talking about protecting your goodwill in this situation, and then if you can change the situation, go ahead. And if you figure out, okay, there's nothing that can be done here, this is fruitless, then you put it aside. The Buddha has a couple of examples, like people who are not worth getting involved in discussions with. Basically they say something and then they won't admit that they said it. Or they go back and they try to cover up what they said, or they accuse you of saying things that you didn't say. And the Buddha said, this person is not worth talking to. Now, if it's somebody in your family, you've got to talk to